when it comes time to do something, I would rather put myself at risk than put my team at risk. And if my team is going to be at risk, then I have to lead my team into risk. And it has to be a team decision that we're going to go as a team.
Welcome to the World Extreme Medicine podcast, The End of Blindness. With myself, your host, Bhavandeep Singh, and my guests, ophthalmic surgeon Dr. James Guzek and director AJ Martinson. The End of Blindness is an award-winning documentary highlighting the incredible true story of Dr. Samuel Bora, who is the only ophthalmologist for 3 million people in Ethiopia, a country currently in the midst of civil war and one with the highest rates of blindness in all of Africa. In this podcast, we will talk about the awe-inspiring precision microsurgery being performed in mobile operating theaters that can be transported in the back of SUVs, most often in the middle of nowhere, the impact cataract-related blindness has on the local population, and the mindset required to make a difference in extreme environments far removed from the high-tech operating theaters of the West. I'm honored today to be joined by one of Dr. Bora's colleagues, Dr. James Guzek, who has been practicing ophthalmology for over 30 years and has served as the chief of ophthalmology for several years at the J.L. Pettis VA Hospital, Loma Linda, California, as well as working in Saudi Arabia for 3 years, Sri Lanka for 3 years, and Ghana for 4 years, before moving to the Pacific Cataract and Laser Surgery Institute, Kennewick, Washington, where he is now based. I'm also very grateful to be joined by the director of the End of Blindness movie, Mr. AJ Martinson, who has worked as a producer and director on several projects, ranging from documentaries, independent films, and spy thrillers, and who also has founded his own production company, Section 3 Films. These men have in common a desire to use their skills to help those in need and also to bring about a lasting and positive change to areas of the world where most often the need is greatest, but resources the fewest.
Thanks for having us, Pav.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, I think we should just get straight into it and start off with our discussion. Jim, could you explain for the benefit of our listeners exactly what a cataract is? And then could you describe the burden of cataract-related blindness in the developing world?
Okay, so when the natural lens becomes cloudy, we call it a cataract. And so what we do with modern cataract surgery is we remove the cloudy part of the cataract, the inside part, and we put in an implant lens, ideally one that will suit the patient to give them distance vision and to restore their sight. And so as far as the burden of cataracts, and so about in the developing world, so Africa and Central America, South America, and Asia, and parts of Asia. So in the developing world, about half of all blindness is from cataract. And so in our circumstance in Ethiopia, we have supported Dr. Samuel. We with high volume cataract surgery in ICAMP settings. We've been providing sight restoring cataract surgery with an implant calculated to give people good vision at distance for about $50 per eye. And it's about, if you look at the overall population of Ethiopia, it's about 1% of the population is blind. And so about half of that would be blindness that's easily curable and with a 5 or 6 minute cataract surgery.
Thank you, James. The numbers are staggering. I've got some numbers here. from a paper I was reading, and they say in 2020, an estimated 15.2 million people worldwide, aged 50 plus, were blind due to cataract. And in the West, generally the cataract is pretty much an inconvenience given the levels of care we have and the access to care we have. But obviously, in the setting of the developing world, it can be something that can completely destroy lives, because blindness sets in, people cannot work, they therefore cannot provide for their family, leads to poverty, starvation, and it can end lives. So it's a really big problem.
I would phrase it a little, I would put the order a little different, Pav.
Okay.
So what we're dealing with mostly, my main concern in the developing world is with people that are already poor, but who are managing. And they can manage because they can work, and so they can feed themselves and their family, whether a little bit better one day than another day. But when somebody who's poor becomes blind, it becomes a hopeless situation for that person. And if they're responsible, if they're the primary wage earner for a wife and for small children, then it's a desperate situation for everybody in the family. Or even if they're a grandfather and the grandfather is working and is no longer able to work, then the children often have to decide, are we going to try to get grandpa cataract surgery, or are we going to send the kids to school because school fees have to be paid? So that's the way I would frame it.
Okay, now that's and obviously you've seen the effects firsthand, haven't you? Obviously, you've both been on the ground. Yeah.
Sure.
Yep. From your experience, what are the main barriers that prevent the effective management of cataract blindness in the developing world, such as Ethiopia?
So this is a question which, we can't just gloss over this question. This really takes, there's many different factors, and of course there are principal factors, but then there are many underlying, smaller sub-factors as well. But certainly we would have to say poverty is the main factor. As I said, when people are healthy, they can somehow manage, but if the poor become blind, it becomes a hopeless situation. Now, even if they're in the capital where there are let's say they're fortunate, they're in the capital where there are eye care providers, it might cost between $500 and $1,000 or even $2,000 to get a cataract surgery done. But if they're in a rural area where there's far poorer access to eye care, they may not have they may not even know where to go for a cataract surgery. And if they would know to go to the capital, it's very expensive for people in the countryside to go to the city and then to navigate into the government healthcare system and stay there for days and then get an appointment and stay there for more days and then whatever the charges are. So we would have to say unquestionably that poverty is the number one factor. But the next most important factor is the role of the eye care specialist in the developing world. Well, there are not so many of them, and about half of the ones that are there are working in the capital. Of course, they can make a living in the capital much more easily than they can in the districts. It's really impossible to make a good living taking care of poor blind people all the time because they just can't pay. And so the ones who are out in the districts are generally on a salary from somebody like CBM or Light for the World or the Royal Commonwealth Society or some other groups that might be able to fund them, or even the government. But the salaries are fairly low, I would say. I would say too low to really attract the highest quality and to incentivize them. Then there's the problem of the wives. And a lot of, for the male ophthalmologists, the wives often don't want to be living in the rural areas, in part because of the schooling. The best schools are in the capital, and if you want your children to succeed, which of course parents do, then the both parents want their kids to be going to good schools, which are not available in rural areas, and then the cost is there. So the cost can be $1,000 or more per child per year, and that's just simply not affordable on a salary if you're in one of the rural areas. So in some, there's very few eye surgeons for a couple of reasons, and these among others. There's not so many surgeons that choose and are able to live in rural areas, even if they have a heart and they want to serve poor people. They want to help the blind. Oftentimes, it's just not financially possible for the family, and. So then we have the matter that then there's other matters as well that are perhaps lesser matters, but still important. So what you have, the reason for blindness is that most cataract surgeons are limited and end up doing maybe 200 or 300 or 400 cataract surgeries per year. There's not really mechanisms in place for everybody to do, eye camps and so on. And not all surgeons are created equal. If we look at say 100 cataract surgeries in the developing world, certainly we're going to find maybe 2 out of the 100 or 2 or 3 out of the 100 that just are naturally superbly gifted. And I just don't mean, first of all would be just, superb surgeons that even in eye camp situations can get just superb results. But also in terms of kindness, in terms of a heart to be able to perform the very laborious work that is involved with an eye camp. I can tell you, Pav, I've done, in my 4 years that I was in Ghana, I would do eye camp work about 3 or 4 times a year, and they were exhausting. It is a very laborious enterprise, and so it's hard to find ophthalmologists that really would want to do more than 2 or 3 or 4 eye camps in a year that have the capacity to do that, and they can do high volume cataract surgery all the time. So then you get into remuneration at eye camps. So, and here's where the rubber maybe hits the road again. So generally speaking, it's basically the per diem salary for a cataract surgeon or ophthalmologist at an eye camp might be around $150 per day. Well, that may sound wonderful and great to, from our side. Wow, we're paying them that much, and that does attract cataract surgeons and ophthalmologists to do eye camps, and because they can make $1,000 or so in a week. But really, when it comes down to it, there's really, and they work, all these guys are working their tails off. But when it comes down to it, thought given to being even more productive and doing more and being able to help more people is not there, because there's really no incentive, and it's not done that many times a year. So the economies of scale don't really fall into it, and then there's a couple of other smaller factors. And we might get into, in any place there's honesty factors, integrity factors, jealousy, and things like this affect, how we in the West are able to interface with different people. And then finally, I don't think that there's, except for the paradigm which we've used in Ethiopia, I think we have the best paradigm. I may be biased a little bit, who knows? But other than our paradigm, I don't see a great paradigm for working with top ophthalmic surgeons who would want and who would be a blessing to the people doing monthly eye camps 1 week a month. In high volume eye camp situations. So that's a long answer to a short question, and I'm sure in any given situation there are even more complexities involved, but at least that touches on the main ones.
Wonderful, Jim. Thank you. Yeah, as you said, it is a multi-level problem that kind of spans society, families, individual levels. Just based on what you said, and touching upon what you said, how did you become involved as as an ophthalmologist trained in the US, how did you become involved in providing cataract relief in the developing world? Because we've spoken a bit earlier, and you had quite a personal journey in that as well.
Yes. So, well, you've given me permission to go into that a little bit. So, when my father was an ophthalmologist, and so when I tried ophthalmology, I was smitten, and I really loved ophthalmology. But along the way, I got a girl pregnant, and I was behaving very selfishly, only thinking of myself. And when I got that girl pregnant, and she had the child, and she gave the child up for adoption, and I'm in contact with the not so young man. He's 40 years old now, but it shook me to my core, making me realize that my actions have consequences, and I was just living life for myself in a very selfish manner. And it made me take a big step backwards and ask God, to help me to not hurt people like that, not to hurt my son, not to hurt the girls like I was doing. And so really, over the course of the next few years, through meditation and prayer, and I started to just quiet myself and I think not become selfish. And God blessed me with that. But then I started to ask God, well, what did he want from me? Now that I was prepared and I was more supple. And the answer that I got back was the gift that I had been given was not for me. It was to help other people. And so I had taken my first job after training in Saudi Arabia. And I came back from Saudi Arabia, and not knowing exactly what I was going to do, but then I eventually accepted a position with the Christian Blind Mission, or CBM, and I spent 3 years in Sri Lanka, and doing cataract surgery on people there, and I learned a tremendous amount there, and I was able to help a lot of people there. So the Lord has continued, I believe, to work in my life, to lead me, to do extraordinary things and to have extraordinary opportunities. And He's always provided funding and help from other people to be able to do things, as for example, with Dr. Samuel, as we see in AJ's wonderful video.
Thank you, James. No, I love that, and I remember we spoke at one point when we initially spoke, and you are a man of strong faith, and you had that. I guess you could call it, as you described, when you had that low point, you kind of faced the shadow, or as the dragon, as some people call it in philosophy, that the transformative moment, and then you went on what could be described as a bit of a hero's journey, when you see that in front of you and you realize, right, it's time for me to make a change. I also remember hearing in the End of Blindness movie a really wonderful line that you said, talking about how you kind of take that step into the unknown, or how you have taken that step into the unknown on countless occasions. You said, I do my part, God does his. And you spoke about, you're going out there with the desire to help people and get these surgeries going. And sometimes you're not quite sure how it's going to turn out. And then the people on the ground look to you for the leadership. And then you've got your trust and your faith in God, that you believe that, you're going to be caught, and, everything is going to be okay. Just to talk about that, because, I mean, faith, some people have faith, some people don't, but I think we can all have shared virtues, and as a human race, we all have a desire to look after each other, to do good. Do you think your faith gives you the courage and freedom to take the step into the unknown, to be present in the action, the doing of the deed, rather than being bogged down by a fear of failure, say?
Well, for me, it's a matter that I'm not so smart that I know what is in the future. No, and I don't think anybody can know what's in the future. And so my job is to, as you say, to discern what it is that's God's plan. And if it's in God's plan, whether it works or it doesn't work, as long as I'm doing what God wants for me to do, it's a success for me. So the project doesn't have to work. That's not the end goal. The end goal is for me to do what God wants for me to do, and then He has to take care of the rest.
Wonderful. Yeah. So there's a saying I've been brought up with is you can, well, I mean, I'm not sure it's cross cultures, but you can sow the seeds, but the harvest or the fruit is out of your hands, right? So
yes, exactly.
Yeah. Just coming back to we mentioned that the paradigm, the structure in Ethiopia that you've set up. Could you talk to us about that a little bit and just how, what the infrastructure on the ground there is?
Okay, so when I went to Ethiopia, I first went with Larry Thomas, who just passed away in December of 2020. And Larry was the one who brought me over. He was making a plea to all the ophthalmologists who he knew, and through a network of work, I was made aware of his request for an ophthalmologist over in rural Ethiopia. So for the first time when I went over, for me to solicit donations, it required the signature of a national ophthalmologist, and Dr. Samuel was the only national ophthalmologist in that region. And so the Sister Evelyn Puestra, went to Dr. Samuel and got him to sign the request that he would take care of any complications or whatever happened. And that allowed me to solicit from C International and from other groups, so that when I went to Ethiopia with Larry, I had a whole bunch of eye drops and medications and supplies and operating microscope and so on. So when I went there and I opened up my box of goods, I could start, I could screen people for cataracts, and I could actually do cataract surgery. And so at that time, there was just a bunch of empty rooms, and they were doing some screening, but there were eye nurses that were there, and that was very important. And Samuel was in a different hospital, and he was a couple 2 hours away, and he had a fully functioning eye operating unit. And so what we had were two important pieces on the ground. We had a national ophthalmologist that was young and smart and a good surgeon with a heart to care for people with unquestionable integrity. And we had Sister Evelyn, who could act to do purchasing and coordination and logistics and provide vehicles. And so it took a few years, because another part of this is relationship. And so when I would go to Ethiopia, each time I would make an effort to swing by. Actually, the first time we met, it's a bit funny, but the first time I went, I didn't meet Dr. Samuel the first time. And my heart was so wounded when I went the first time. I came back about 6 months later. And Sister Evelyn, God bless her, understood the importance of relationship. And so she notified Dr. Samuel that she wanted for him to come and meet me when I was at Dembidolo. And he told her, he said, "Sister, I'm swamped with patients. I can't possibly come." And she wouldn't take no for an answer. She told him, "Well, I'm going to send a car. And then I want you to come. Please come." And so the car comes, okay, and he knows he's been notified such and such a day the car is coming, and the sister had her way. So he came and we met and we hit it off very, very well, almost as if we had known each other and were brothers all our lives. And so every time I would go to Ethiopia, I would make sure to renew that friendship with Samuel. And so then he was at the end of his promised time because he had to pay back a couple of years for the training that he had received in ophthalmology. So he did that by working at Ira Hospital for a couple of years. And he had even worked in excess of that because of the financial difficulties faced, with just not making enough money. He was going to go work at the Capitol. But the infrastructure was there for something to happen. But it was only there to happen maybe 1 week a month. Samuel needs to be with his family in the Capitol. I don't want to take him away where he's where he's not able to be with his family. That would be wrong. But can we ask him, could he find it in his heart to give 1 week per month to do an eye camp every month? And then Sister Evelyn could do the logistics, she could do the purchasing, and then not only could he work then at IRA and at Dembidola, but he could do outreach as well. And what we would do is then we would fundraise for the disposables, but not only that, we would pay him a base salary and an incentive salary on a per cataract basis. And so with all of that on the plate and offering it, must have seemed awfully bizarre to Dr. Samuel, because who is Jim Guzek? I mean, I'm nobody, I'm not CBM, I'm not Light for the World. And so he really had to discern whether he could trust Larry Thomas and me. And in the end, he struggled with it. He told us he had knots in his stomach. He was struggling and struggling and struggling. And finally, he decided, well, that was what God wanted from him. And then he felt at peace. And he said he was able to sleep then. So we started working together, and we sponsored eye camps 1 week a month, every month. And we did that from 2013 onwards. And it's, Dr. Samuel has exceeded our wildest expectations. Most recently, he's completed more than 25,000 cataract surgeries for us, which is something we only dreamed of back in 2013.
That's amazing. That's the staggering numbers. And yeah, I mean, again, when I was watching the End of Blindness movie, I think, James, as you mentioned earlier, all the different factors, the barriers that contribute to the burden of blindness, cataract-related blindness. I think you'd be really struck gold with Dr. Bora, because he's got it all, hasn't he? He's got the skill, the personality, the compassion, the right attitude. And it's all about a sacrifice, isn't it? Because I remember on the I think AJ did a post recently, a quotation from the movie, where you see Dr. Bora with his daughter, and he's saying, I tell, when she asks me, Daddy, why are you going away? I say it's for the blind people, and then she understands. So that the little girl, no little girl wants her father to go away for a long time, but when you tell her it's for the blind people, even the little girl understands. That was very touching. And and I really urge people listening to go out, and we'll talk about End of Blindness and where to see it at the end of the podcast. But I really urge people to go out and see it. It's an emotional journey. It's a inspiring journey of what can be done. If the mindset, the heart is in the right place. Before AJ, I will come to you in a second. But finally, James, just to talk about, because we spoke about cataract, what it is for our listeners. In the West, phacoemulsification is our mainstay of a technique of getting rid of cataracts, which is basically an ultrasonic probe, which oscillates the ultrasonic frequencies and chops up the lens, and you can aspirate it out. The technique used in cataracts done in the developing world, M6, I believe, is a lot different. Could you just briefly discuss the differences, and how has it been a game changer in the sense of the financial and the technical abilities required?
Right. So really, since a cataract is a clouding of the lens, Pav, so really the the method of removing the cloudy lens is inconsequential. If we can remove the contents of the lens safely, and we can do it through a small incision, and we can put in an implant lens that's suitable for the eye, we can accomplish the goal and restore surgery. And that's what manual small incision cataract surgery, or M6, does. And so we found a way to remove this 9 or 10 millimeter by 4 millimeter thick cloudy lens through what amounts to about a 6 millimeter incision that's flayed out. It's just this very special technique, and Samuel does it just as good as anybody in the world. And so, but the difference is he uses basically a needle to remove the whole cataract, instead of a $50,000 machine plus a whole lot more saline and a whole lot more viscoelastic in order to remove it using phacoemulsification. So where cost is an overriding factor, and it is for ICAMs, and where we can do it safely and effectively and get the same result for $50, why would we make patients or our donors pay, let's say, $300 or $400 or $500 per cataract? It would not be a good use of donor money.
Exactly. And just again to highlight to our listeners, what we're talking about a working margin of a few millimeters, really, when we talk about cataract surgery. And again, in the End of Blindness, we see how there are mobile operating rooms almost, where the equipment is put in vans and vehicles, and you're taking these over to sites in the bush and performing this degree of high precision surgery. How, James, do you feel when you're obviously performing surgery in that setting compared to performing surgery back at home in the US?
Well, it's not for the faint-hearted. It's, you have to make compromises, but you have to know what compromises you're willing to make. And there are a lot of compromises that you can't make. You have to have a team that really has been hardened and trained so that they know how things run and they can protect the patients. But if you can do that, you can make, as it were, magic by helping people to get their lives back by giving them their sight. Exactly.
AJ, I'm going to bring you in now and speak to you and ask you a few questions about how you've become involved and your input on this. You obviously have your own production company. You've been working on documentaries, independent films, spy thrillers. What led you to tell the story of Dr. Bora and his colleagues in Ethiopia?
Well, just like Jim said, it all kind of begins with Larry. Dr. Larry Thomas was my cousin. He's the founder of THAF, and they're the organization that sponsors, Dr. Samuel's work. And I've been volunteering with him and for him since I was 16, and he brought me out to Ethiopia in 2009, and I took my little Handycam DV camcorder, and it was right when I was getting started making films and was really getting interested in filmmaking. And so I shot a documentary for him there on his work with podoconiosis, which is another tropical disease. I believe it's a viral infection of the foot that causes swelling. It's really a devastating thing. Very hard to cure. There's some treatment that you can do to ease the swelling. And it's entirely preventable just with shoes, which is something that is not commonly available, especially out in these rural areas. And so I made that film, and Larry liked it. He encouraged me. And that was actually my first ever professional production that I made for someone. So THAF and my film career have gone hand in hand for pretty much my entire career.
Sorry, just to interrupt that. So that's for the benefit of the listeners, the Tropical Health Alliance Foundation, THAF. So if they want to look that up, they can. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Carry on. Yes, please.
Yeah. And so after doing that production, he brought me back again, and that's when I met Dr. Guzek for the first time. Well, he was operating in Dimbidolo out of one of these remote eye camps. And we did a film at that time called Two Lives Saved that focused on one of the most heartbreaking issues of blindness in Ethiopia. And that's, they don't have access to the resources we have here. They don't have seeing eye dogs. And so often a child will be used as a guide leading, the elderly family members around. And so the film focused on a young girl, 7 years old. She's stuck leading her grandfather day after day. He has to go to the bathroom. She has to lead him. He has to walk down the street. She has to lead him. She can't go to school, can't work. It's terrible. And we do Dr. Guzek does the cataract surgery. Grandpa can see again. And there's this beautiful moment in the film where their hands release and two people are now completely free. Grandpa from blindness and the young girl from leading him around. And so that was extremely touching and very formative. And then many years later, Larry pulls me back to Ethiopia again. And he introduces me to Dr. Samuel. And in the first 10 minutes of meeting him, I realized this project needed to not be a 3-minute video that goes on a website and that's it. Dr. Samuel's character, first and foremost, really struck me as something that, like we're talking about how, Tropical Health Alliance Foundation struck gold working with Dr. Samuel and his character behind that really touched me. I mean, not only his dedication to the craft and to helping people see, which is amazing. And we've talked a little bit about, how being an ophthalmologist in rural Ethiopia is not going to make you rich by any means. This is a service-oriented mission he has. But also, even as a young kid, he told a story on camera about how he was walking to school every day barefoot for miles and miles and miles just because he wanted an education. And, staying up late into the night with his peers studying just so he could pass his exams and never giving up in any of that. And so his determination, his perseverance, and his, selfless desire to help people. When he first started as a doctor, he didn't start in the capital city. He went back to the rural areas where he was from and decided to serve there first. And that's where he got inspired to be an ophthalmologist. So meeting him, you just got this sense it had to be a story that needed to be shared and shared completely and fully and in a big way, not just, living on a website somewhere. So that's what really inspired me to make this film.
Wonderful. And what I can see comes across is just how much he inspired you, and that motivation to get the story out there, which is partly obviously why we're doing this call as well, and just to highlight all the efforts you've put in, Dr. Guzek has put in. It's something that I think does really need to go out, and people need to become aware of it, because as you mentioned, the story of the little girl and her grandfather, and as Dr. Guzek was mentioning earlier, all those intricate levels of that, that cause this problem and the effect it has on families and society. We tend not to think about, an old person who is blind from cataract actually is going to tie down the little grandchild who can't play with their friends. And that's a childhood gone, right? So they've lost their childhood. And if you can do a $50 surgery, then you've basically restored two people's lives. On that note, I think you've gone over this before, but what struck you the most in terms of the story of the people out there who are suffering from blindness from cataract and the surgeons who go out there and provide the care?
When you meet the patients out there, the number one sense that I have is hopelessness. Being blind is difficult anywhere in the world. Being blind in rural Ethiopia is exceptionally difficult. Low road infrastructure, very few social programs. A lot of the challenges that we've already talked about here, make it very hard on someone. And, oftentimes life is hanging in the balance. We open the film with Mrs. Thaddeledge, who could be anyone's grandmother, But just because of cataracts, she's not able to work, which means she's not able to eat. And her number one desire in life, it's not lofty. I want to see so I can work and I can put food on the table, even if that means just making injera bread and selling it to my community around me. And that's something, just that sheer helplessness and desperation, just to be able to see from something that here in the United States, I mean, the moment you have any inkling of a cataract, it's taken care of. And you can see completely normal in, a matter of minutes, it really struck me, the contrast. And then with the surgical team, we talk about a hardened surgical team who is ready to combat anything. The dedication to excellence that everyone on that team has, whether it's the person who's sterilizing the equipment, the people who are packing the gear when we're unloading and building the clinic, and shipping containers, or mission hospitals, or schools even. Every step of the way, every person in that team is just dedicated to providing the absolute best that they can for the blind poor in the country, who could never afford any version of cataract surgery, but they're getting the absolute best, which means no glasses afterwards, no Coke bottle glasses. Every eye is measured precisely, correct intraocular lens going in 20/20 the day after surgery. Blows my mind that that's the level that they're providing. And that's Dr. Samuel. He sets that tone for everyone else.
And you mentioned the dedication to excellence, and I think that's probably one of the essences of a surgeon and a surgical team. Yeah. What impact do you want this movie to have, AJ?
That's a great question. I think it's twofold. And the first is, when someone watches this, I hope that they have their faith in humanity restored. We've been through some really hard times as a world lately, and people need positive, uplifting content that will leave them feeling like there is hope in this world. And whether that's hope for anyone, hope for someone who's just wants to see so they can go back to work. I think that'll leave you with a very warm feeling, and it'll show you what humanity looks like when it operates at its very best, at its kindest, at its purest, at its most honest. And so that's kind of the emotional goal. On a very real level, I hope that this film, through international distribution, gets translated and is shown in countries that are underserved by ophthalmologists, and that it inspires more people in those countries to do what Dr. Samuel is doing, to provide this kind of surgery. Because he was inspired, and we've talked to him post-film and it didn't make it in, but he was inspired by being in the OR and watching people come out, go in and then they come out seeing, and looking at the joy on their faces in Ira Hospital. And, at that time, they weren't doing the full measurement. They were kind of giving them the Coke bottle glasses after surgery. And he wanted to do more, and he wanted to do it better. And he asked, how can I get involved with that? And that's how he ended up being an ophthalmologist. So if people can see that level of impact, maybe it'll inspire them as well. And so that's my lofty, dream.
Wonderful.
That I hope comes true.
And I think it will, because personally, I can vouch for that, because having seen it, it ticked all those boxes. And, as an ophthalmologist coming to the end of my training, it's given me a lot of plans and inspirations. Dr. Guzek, just coming back to you, AJ's mentioned the kind of the mindset of the types of surgeons that go out there. And you've done many things. I think you've just been incredibly humble throughout this talk about your achievements. But you've got many years of experience. And watching the movie, what I've picked up and what we've spoken about in the past is your philosophy of wanting to fix problems and not just make money. Because as ophthalmologists, we know we can just make loads of money, right? And we can have a nice, easy life. That's the perk of the career. But in the movie, you mentioned that, and this is I loved how you put this. You said, us surgeons have been given a chance to train, and that we should take the responsibility to use our gifts. What advice would you give to ophthalmologists or doctors in other specialties who want to embark on providing medical or surgical care in the developing world and just don't really know how to start to go about doing it.
Right. So I applaud you, Pav, for you're starting out on the right track and you're starting out young. And that's, if you're going to do this, there's going to be ups and downs and successes and failures. And really, so you want to do this with somebody. You want to apprentice under somebody who's doing it. And you want to start ideally when you're on the younger side. I think it would be hard to work in a regular Western setting all your life, and then when you retire, think that you're going to go over and do mission work or developing world work at that time. That's maybe it's possible, but I think it's kind of unlikely. So, but for all doctors, and let's say especially for ophthalmologists, I think, not everybody is called to do this kind of work, but everybody is called to do something. And so those who are called to do the work can certainly use the support and encouragement, financially and otherwise, from those who are not called. So, even my office mate, Dr. McNeil, who's now passed away, used to donate to every time I'd go over, he'd give me a gift, and telling me, it's not my call to go over, but I want to do something, and I think everybody can do something. Yeah,
I think that's simple but very, very poignant, very relevant, and very useful advice. And you got to find your calling, really, and do what rocks the boat for you, what is your passion, what gives you that fire inside. Mm-hmm. How would you, obviously in all the work you've done, James, failure, you must have dealt with lots of failures. What's your advice for facing failure and dealing with failure?
Well, the first project I did, I was in Saudi Arabia, and I decided to go over to Pakistan to see whether I could do some cataract surgery over there. And I went there and I accomplished nothing. I did no cataract surgeries. I saw no patients because the person who I was meeting ended up having a business and more important than me, and so he never showed up at the airport. So the importance of your contact person and your faith in that person who's going to do the logistics for you in country is important. But success is built on failure. I learned a tremendous amount even from that experience and from other experiences. And nobody is, and it's not that, again, it's not that I measure my success, that the project has to be a success. I tell myself, well, I just have to do my part. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, well, it doesn't work. I can tell you a story of when I first started in Ethiopia and I was bringing over equipment. And I was having a dickens of a time. We had done all of the paperwork ahead of time and everything was approved, but we got there and more paperwork was needed. So they took me to one government office after another, and the priest who was with me went to the head man, and I was sitting outside, and he told the bureaucrat, the top guy, he said, "Look at that doctor." He said, "Now you tell me, if he doesn't get his medicine in here and his surgery supplies, do you think he's ever going to come back to help our people?" And of course, had I not gotten everything through, I would not have come back. It would have been assigned to me that, well, God was closing the door on Ethiopia. And I tell you, that bureaucrat, that head man and his office, they turned that building upside down. And within 2 hours, I had the paperwork I needed, which I wonder whether anybody's ever gotten it that fast, up and down the floors. But I believe God wanted for my mission to be a success that time. And because of that, we have developed the relationship with Dr. Samuel. And so, but You can't know ahead of time. Is it going to be a success or is it going to be a failure? Well, you can never know.
That's wonderful. I think and you mentioned this earlier as well, but I think, and I've seen this attitude reflected in actually across fields. I see, athletes and champions in sport also talk about this. It's about the doing, the action, and not the obsessing of the outcome, because you find your calling, you have the fire within you, and you just go out there and do it, and you leave the outcome to the higher power. You leave that to God. You leave that to however things are going to turn out, because then that frees you to actually work at your hardest. James, you've obviously, touching upon what you just spoke about, a lot of this has involved the unknown, I can imagine, and leading people into the unknown. How do you go about doing that? And how do you go about inspiring people, to take action and to look to you for leadership?
As long as I know that I'm in God's will, it doesn't really matter whether I live or die. I'm going to die sooner or later. So when it comes time to do something, I would rather put myself at risk than put my team at risk. And if my team is going to be at risk, then I have to lead my team into risk. And it has to be a team decision that we're going to go as a team. And so, does that answer the question?
It does very well. Yes, I love that, because again, I think that's the essence of a leader, because leadership is taking care of those in your charge, I think, which is what sums it up. There's books written upon it, but if you're not looking after the people who you're leading, then you're not leading. Also, I want to, faith has been a big theme of your life and of what we've spoken about today in the podcast. And that really resonates with me. And I think it's a wonderful thing, faith. And generally speaking, sometimes in the world, faith gets a bit of a bad rap. I think that's probably how it's represented. But I think we can all agree the essence of faith always has been to transform ourselves to the best we can be. And then by that nature, we can then transform the world around us in our small bubbles, our friends, our family, our communities. And I can see those values reflected in you. And it was a pleasure for us to talk when we first made contact, and just to see these themes permeate through your life and how you've gone about providing this care to people is I find very inspiring. And I think it should be inspiring for people who have faith and those who don't, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to be our best selves and kind of help and change the world around us. Yes. We're going to start wrapping up soon. I want to just ask a few final questions. Dr. Guzek, looking back over this career you've had, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I have tried since I was chastised for my stupidity and my wrong inclinations. I have just tried to do what is right, and I have tried to understand what is good and what is the truth. And those are my guiding principles, and they have worked for me. It has been a wonderful life. I've had 10 lives, really, or 20. I've lived so many life and death experiences that the Lord has given me. Now, not everyone has been a success. Okay, there have been some failures, but I have lived a life that when I die, I can't go to God and say, Lord, it was a boring life, far from it.
Do you think your commitment to service has been one of the main reasons for that?
God, that is one of the gifts, I would say, that God has given me, that my commitment is to do what is right and which I believe God wants for us to do the right thing always. He never wants us to do the wrong thing. So what is his plan for my life? Well, it's to do the right thing. It's part of his plan. And so that plan for me involves service. And I think to have this gift that I can get behind a microscope and I can take a blind person and make them see. It is a mind-boggling gift. Pav, you're going to understand this. If you don't understand it already, it's mind-boggling. That the next morning, blind people come and you've given them their life back. Can life get any better than that? Can the gift God has given me to give to other people? I can't imagine God could give me any greater gift.
Wonderful. I think that's spot on. And I'm grateful. I'm lucky to have had a little bit of that experience in my training. We have you take out a very dense nuclear sclerotic cataract, counting fingers vision, and just after they've come off the table, they can see light, and they're just absolutely gleaming. The patients is just so happy, and what you're doing this times 1,000 in the developing world. It's I think you've just summed up the motivation, the inspiration that we all have, and that we are very lucky to have as ophthalmologists, because in the West, in the training pathways, working, you can get bogged down in the treadmill of the rat race, but people like yourselves remind us of just what is possible, and it's been watching the End of Blindness, listening to your journey, it's been incredibly inspiring. And I really hope that our listeners, be they ophthalmologists or doctors in other specialties, can really take something from this, something very tangible, to go away, look at their skills, find that, there's a reason we have all been given a chance to train, and now we must go out there and we have the responsibility to use and share that gift. Finally, to both of you, we've spoken about him throughout this last hour or so, and I'm hoping to have him with us on our next podcast. Obviously, the situation in Ethiopia is a little bit precarious right now, but Dr. Samuel Bora, a bit of a legend. Do you have any final words about him? And what would you say to people who have now been inspired to go and watch the movie? So maybe
go ahead, AJ.
Yeah, AJ, go ahead.
Well, I think I think something that really strikes me about Dr. Samuel is how matter of fact he is about what he's doing, and how little he wants or needs the spotlight on him. And I know definitely this film has brought, we've had to work within his comfort zone, because his goal is not to be any sort of famous. His goal is just to help people see. And I really appreciate how humble he is. I mean, he's doing amazing, life-changing work. And to him, it's just about the patients. It's not about any of the glory or the fame or anything. It's just about that. And I think that that's a really strong model that, even in my own work as a filmmaker, which is sometimes can be all about the glory and the fame and all of that kind of stuff. I'm trying to, really integrate that into my life too, is that perspective that, you stay humble and you focus on helping people and changing lives. And I really hope that's a takeaway that a lot of people take out of the film as well. So yeah, I think, he's seen the movie, he's excited about the movie, and he's excited the message is getting out. But I think if it were up to him, he would just quietly still be doing cataract surgery, because this is, it's about the patients.
Right.
Yeah.
Well said, AJ. I don't think I need to add anything to that.
Okay. No, yeah, well said, AJ. And I think that's a really good place to come to an end. And thank you both so much, not only for your time, but your insights, the inspiration you've shared with us, and all the hard work you've put in with the movie, and the work surrounding it. It truly is incredibly inspirational. For the benefit of the listeners, we will be putting out links when the podcast goes live, so they can access the movie. It's available online. It's, I really recommend people go and watch it. It's also
one more thing. You didn't ask me what I have planned next.
Oh, please, yes. What do you have planned next, James?
So the good news is that's some real thrilling news. Time for champagne. We got a suite of operating room instruments sent into Juba, South Sudan, where we've sent it to one of the young cataract surgeons there, and we're hoping to duplicate this whole effort in South Sudan. A lot higher level difficulty, but I think it can be done.
Wow. Okay, I'm glad you shared that with us. I think you will do it. I mean, you don't want to have less difficulty, don't you? You want to. You want. You can't settle now. You have to keep raising that bar and bigger challenges. When is that? When do you expect that things to get running out there?
So what has to happen next is we're funding 3 of the cataract surgeons to move to WAU, W-A-U. That's the town of WAU. It's the second largest town in South Sudan. There's no ophthalmologists there now, but there's several 100,000 people there. And so when they get there, we're gonna back up their salaries and the bread and the equipment for give or take 6 months, and then they're going to be on their own to make that a private clinic. But with that private clinic, they will then have the staff and training, and the top doctor, Dr. David Malish, I believe, has the same characteristics as Dr. Samuel. And so we're hoping then from WOW to be able to send him once a month for 1 week eye camps to do the same kind of eye camp work that we've done in Ethiopia to help the people in that region to have hope and to see.
Wonderful. And I really hope it does kick off well, and that it's not the end, and it's another stepping stone to literally ending blindness step by step in the countries we've spoken of. And it's a great job you guys are doing. So just to end there, we will be putting up links about where people can see the end of blindness. So AJ, if you let us know for the benefit of our listeners, where can we see this movie, The End of Blindness?
Yeah, so you can check out The End of Blindness at theendofblindness.com/watch. There you're going to find links to iTunes, Apple TV, YouTube TV, and several other streaming platforms as they come out. The End of Blindness is also premiering February 12 at the Santa Fe Film Festival. So if any of your listeners are in New Mexico and want to watch an incredible movie on February 12th, come to the Santa Fe Film Fest, and you can catch us there.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And I think just to summarize some of the main points, there's been many points, but from our conversation today, for fellow doctors, ophthalmologists or not, it's about finding your calling, getting your training in, staying humble, staying compassionate, and then thinking about service to your fellow man. And I think from what I've heard from you both, if you stick to those ideals, you can't really go wrong, can you?
No.
Yep. Thank you very much to you both. And we will call that an end today. Thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome, Pav.
Take care.
Thanks so much, Pav. This was amazing.